Welcome to this explainer. Okay, picture this. You walk into an interview room, your heart is literally pounding out of your chest, your palms are sweating, and suddenly your mind just goes completely blank. If you've ever been there, you are definitely not alone. There's this huge universal anxiety and honestly a really deep confusion that surrounds the whole hiring process. We tend to treat it like this mysterious black box where we just cross our fingers, hope we say the exact right magic words, and win the prize. But what if I told you there is a highly logical, hidden machinery behind every single question they ask? Well, today we are completely decoding the job interview. So, what is a job interview actually for? Let's dive right into this, because to truly conquer the interview, we have to start by tearing down a massive false premise that almost everyone holds. If you ask most people what an interview is, they'll tell you it's a test. They think it's this high-pressure exam designed to see just how smart you are or how perfectly you can recite your resume on command. But looking at it that way just completely sets you up for panic, because that mindset, it's fundamentally wrong.
And this right here is the absolute crucial shift in perspective you need to make right now. The myth is that you are taking a terrifying exam. The reality? It is a mutual decision-making conversation. The employer really isn't trying to trick you. They're basically just trying to answer a simple set of questions to reduce their own risk. They're wondering, can this person do the work? Will they fit the team? Are they reliable? And at the exact same time, you are acting as a filter too. You should be asking yourself if this role in this company are actually worth your precious time and energy. It's absolutely not a pop quiz. Think of it more like a matchmaking filter.
So here's our roadmap to build a really solid understanding of this whole topic today. We're going to cover 4 things. First, the great interview myth. Second, decoding the questions. Third, the interview funnel. And fourth, thinking like a pro.
Okay, kicking things off with part 1, the great interview myth, breaking down the illusion versus the reality. The single most important conceptual shift you can make is understanding this idea of uncertainty reduction. Interviews are not primarily about your performance. They are about reducing uncertainty. Think of it kind of like hunting for an apartment in a super busy, chaotic city, like Karachi, for example. You don't just walk into a place, admire the fresh paint on the walls, and immediately sign a multi-year lease. No way. You check the realities. You're going to check if the water pressure is steady. You'll figure out if the neighborhood is actually workable for your commute. Are the neighbors reasonable? Can you genuinely imagine living there every single day? Well, an interview works exactly the same way. Your beautifully polished resume, that's just the fresh paint. The interview is the structural check to reveal the realities underneath. Moving right along to part 2, decoding the questions. Let's look at the hidden machinery here. Now, what's really interesting is that interview questions are literally never just random traps set by a bored hiring manager. One of the deepest ideas in hiring is actually quite simple. What you have done before is often the absolute best clue to what you're going to do again. Think about it for a second. If you want to know if someone is a capable driver, just listening to them confidently say, "Oh yeah, I'm a really careful driver," well, that isn't going to cut it. You want to see their actual real-world driving record. You want to know the nitty-gritty specifics, like do they brake smoothly in heavy traffic? Do they stay aware of their surroundings? Do they avoid panicking when a car suddenly swerves right in front of them? In an interview, questions about your past behavior turn your vague claims into real, testable evidence. When they ask for examples, they aren't asking just to make small talk. They want to see your practical signal under real-world conditions. Because at the end of the day, evidence beats hope every single time. Good questions also create a window into your thinking process. It's like watching someone cook versus just tasting the final meal. If you just taste a good meal, sure, you know the final result is nice, but if you watch someone actually cook it, you learn so much more about their capability. Do they taste as they go? Do they adjust when something is way too salty? Do they turn down the heat when the pan gets too hot to keep things under control? Interviewers want to watch your mental cooking process. They want to see how you break down a problem, what trade-offs you consider, and how you adjust on the fly. They don't just want to hear a really fast, memorized final answer. Now, if you've ever felt completely ambushed by an interviewer who suddenly goes dead silent, or maybe they ask you to repeat a minor detail, or they hit you with rapid follow-ups, don't panic. Seriously, keep this quote in mind. When you tie a knot, it may look secure, but the real test is whether it holds when pulled. Those follow-up questions are simply the interviewer gently tugging on the knot. They aren't trying to destroy you or trip you up. They are just testing your structural integrity to ensure your answer is real, stable, and well understood. So when we actually translate those common, terrifying questions, we see they are really just targeted lenses assessing very specific risks. When they say, "Tell me about yourself," that isn't a request for your entire chronological life story from birth. It checks how you present your path and your priorities. When they say,
Describe a challenge. That isn't there to make you look bad or incompetent. It checks how you think under pressure. Different questions are really just turning on lights in different parts of a dark room, making sure the overall arrangement works for both sides.
All right, part 3, the interview funnel. Let's look at the system at large.
Let's zoom out a bit to see how all these individual questions fit into a collective system. A lot of folks imagine interviews as this one single dramatic event when you walk in, perform your heart out, and wait for a verdict. But in reality, hiring is a narrowing funnel. You have the screening call, then the first interview, then a deeper interview, and finally, a final interview. And here's the key. Each progressive stage removes a completely different layer of uncertainty from the equation. Let's walk through this process real quick. The screening call is basically just checking the label on the package. It's doing a quick fit check to remove obvious mismatch. Then, the first interview tests basic competence and communication. The deeper interview, that digs into judgment and consistency, really trying to remove hidden uncertainty. And that final interview is all about trust, alignment, and readiness. So if they ask you about teamwork in round 1 and then ask you about it again in round 3, it's not a mistake. That repetition is a very deliberate feature of cross-checking your consistency. Because think about it, you wouldn't judge the overall safety of a massive building just by looking at the nice front door, right? No, you would check the sides, you'd inspect the foundation, you would absolutely look at the interior wiring. Different interviewers are essentially pressing on different parts of your experience to compare your signal against their mental model of the role. They're checking you from different views so the entire team can build a highly reliable, complete picture of who you are. And honestly, this is exactly why final decisions often take so agonizingly long. Imagine hiring an operations manager for a busy company. You simply can't rush it. The delays you experience, they aren't necessarily a reflection of your weakness as a candidate at all. The team is just gathering collective evidence across multiple rounds. They're comparing signals and they're checking for blind spots. Collective judgment is intentionally slow because it is trying to protect the company from making a very, very costly mistake.
Which brings us to our final section, part 4, thinking like a pro and getting that advantage. Understanding this entire machine gives you a massive, frankly unfair advantage. Instead of being a defensive test taker, you unlock a true pro mindset. You can explain your experience with absolute clarity. You start showing your thinking rather than just reciting memorized lines. You instantly recognize the underlying risk a specific question is trying to test. And most importantly, you can read the slow, layered process without panicking. You finally stop seeing it as a mystical performance, and you start seeing it as a grounded, collaborative, problem-solving session.
Because the truth is, the strongest candidates out there don't just know every single answer. They know the game they are playing. They know the interview is just a sequence of evidence-gathering moments. So I have to ask you, now that you can clearly see all this hidden machinery, are you ready to stop just surviving interviews and start actually driving them? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Definitely use this mental model to your advantage, and I'll catch you in the next one.